I took a history of photography class and I learned about Berenice Abbott. So the third great thing that happened to me at RIT is I learned about Berenice Abbott needing an apprentice. That apprenticeship changed my life. We printed every day. We printed to her work. It's the Museum of the City of New York at the time owned the rights to print her work and sell it. And so they would call us and tell us what they needed printed, what they sold. So we printed a lot. My whole photographic education came together under her.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you got beaten in battle.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, a better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders.
It was really great. We had a lot of fun and we worked hard. I was real nervous, of course.
So if you don't know, Berenice Abbott was a famous photographer known for capturing New York's transformation from low-rise to skyscraper-filled in the 1930s. Julia's apprenticeship with this renowned photographer was just the beginning. Despite facing financial constraints, Julia's determination propelled her forward as she traversed the landscapes of the United States, capturing the essence of societal shifts and cultural nuances through her lens. Settling in Los Angeles, her passion for street photography flourished, leading her to establish the Julia Dean Photography Workshops, later evolving into the Los Angeles Center of Photography. Now she organizes an outdoor exhibit called Projecting L.A. that showcases stories about Los Angeles and its people. So let's dive into how she got where she is today.
Can you tell me a little bit about your earliest memories in Nebraska?
Yes, I'm from a small town called Broken Bow, Nebraska. It's a population about 3,500 people. My family could have walked out of a Norman Rockwell painting. We were a family of four. My older brother was good looking and popular and a super athlete. And my dad was a sign painter who finessed the art of bending neon. And my mom was a woman ahead of her time. She started having her own businesses from age 25 on. So she was a big influence for me. So I remember all of that. I remember just this sort of happy childhood growing up. My grandparents had a farm, and I remember lots of things that happened on the farm, including getting stuck up in a tree one day all by myself, wondering what to do about that. And so Broken Bow was just kind of a really nice place to grow up and sort of prepare myself for the rest of the world. But my life was so sort of sheltered and limited back then because it was the early 70s. It was far from the World Wide Web and a smaller world that we know now.
Yeah, did it feel far from like everything, or did you even know what was going on in the outside world?
I knew what was going on because we watched the news in my house all the time, and we had a newspaper that came every day. But it's not the New York Times or the L.A. Times, right? So the world was a big place that I wanted to see. I knew that, and I actually think that maybe I became a photographer or a photojournalist so that I could actually get around the world and see other cultures and the way other people lived, because I grew up in a family. I grew up in a town. It was all white. My family was, my town was completely white except for one Japanese family. That was the Episcopalian minister. And then a Mexican family that had a couple of girls in in high school with me. And so I couldn't wait to get out and discover new people and new things. And that's, I think, kind of where it started.
Do you remember your first encounter with an interest in photography?
My parents gave me a camera just out of the blue. I didn't ask for it, and it changed my life.
When did they give it to you?
I was about 10. And so I took lots of pictures all through high school, junior high and high school. And then when I was a senior in high school, one of my friends came back from college and she had taken a photography class in college. She brought me an 8x10 print that she made me, and I thought, oh my gosh, I really have to sign up for this class. So
Do you remember what the print was of?
it was like a couple of columns, and it was in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was like these kind of it was a landscape, kind of a landscape, cityscape. I probably still have it somewhere.
What about it just like struck you? That, like,
Well,
it had
just the
such a
fact that you could
response?
take a class in photography. I didn't know that you could do that. And I was so excited about it. So I went to the University of Nebraska, like everybody else I knew, after I graduated from Broken Bow High School. And I declared my major journalism just so that I could take the photography classes that I'd heard about. It was there that I met George Tuck, who became my first mentor in photography, Professor Tuck. And I'm going back to Nebraska in a couple of weeks to speak at his memorial. We were friends for 51 years, and he just recently died. So it's kind of full circle.
When you got your first camera at 10, what were you taking pictures of?
My friends, I remember taking pictures of slumber parties with my girlfriends and snapshots. They were all pretty bad. Now that I only have a few of them left, and they're pretty bad pictures. But I just took pictures of my friends, and that was it, really. And then when I went to college and took my first photography class, then I started learning about how to use a real camera, because I just had a little point and shoot that my parents had given me with one of those little square flashes that goes around 4 times. Yeah, really old fashioned. And so that's what I had in high school. And then I took a photography class, and for like 2.5 years that I was at the University of Nebraska, I didn't have my own camera until the very end. I couldn't afford it. And so I was just borrowing all these cameras, and it was really hard on me because some of them were broken, or the light meters didn't work, or something didn't work. And so I felt like I took longer to learn some of the things that I should have learned. And it always makes students feel better when I tell them I only got one good picture in 5 years.
What did you notice that you were gravitating towards as you were in college and also under your mentor, George Tuck?
Well, he was in the journalism department, which is what I had signed up for just so I could take the photography classes. But after I'd taken all of Professor Tuck's classes, I wanted more in photography, even though I'd only taken one good picture in his class in 2.5 years. But I really wanted more. And so the only thing we knew about back then in Nebraska was Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara and Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, in Rochester, New York. So I applied to both, and RIT accepted me right off the bat. And Santa Barbara was completely full, and they said, apply back again in 6 months. So I went east instead of west, and my life unfolded in that manner.
Why do you think they accepted you? And what was that one good picture that you took?
It was of my grandmother. She had a big house and lots of other buildings with lots of stuff in them, and she was selling everything and moving into a small apartment as was getting older, and she was trying everything on, and it's her trying a hat on. It's a really cute shot.
And was that the photo that got you into RIT?
I don't remember actually having to submit photos to get in.
Wait, you didn't have to submit any photos?
I don't think so, because
Is that not part of the process?
Well, I was a beginning photography student, so I don't think you had to. Probably you had to in the master's program at RIT, but we didn't then, and it's a good thing.
So what was it like going out there?
Oh, I was so excited, except that in the process of applying for schools, at about the same time, my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer. As it turns out, he would die 2 weeks before I left for RIT, but his death had just a profound impact on me as a young person. I was 21 and he was only 55. And I've been racing for life ever since. That's the name of my memoir, because I felt like even though I was only 21, I was worried. I just realized you could die anytime, and it doesn't necessarily mean I have a long life in front of me, and I have a lot to do and a lot to accomplish. And so that's why I've been racing for life ever since. And I didn't have any idea how many years I would get. I'm happy that I've gotten all of these. I'm really racing for life, because my time is you have less time all the time.
What do you remember about, like, I guess that diagnosis that he got?
At 20 years old, that's how old I was when I found out. I didn't even know what brain cancer was. I kind of went, what is that? Right? I mean, I'd hardly known about cancer because I was only 20 and I didn't really know people that were dying from it yet. And so it was just kind of a shocker. and he he never recovered from it. He died a year later from the time we found out.
When you found out about the cancer, was there hope still?
I don't think so, especially back then, because this is 1975. There's a lot more miracles that can happen today than 50 years ago, and so what they found a big tumor that went into his brain, so they couldn't take it out because it would take part of his brain out. So they reduced it with what is it, radiation or chemo, whichever it is, and but the damage was done. So he was somewhat childlike, and he was sweet, but he had lost some of his mental capacity.
There's a transition that kind of happens, and some have it earlier than others, where you go from being taken care of by your parents to taking care of your parents. And like was there a continuation of falling into that role of like taking care, or
no? My mom really did everything, and we helped her. That's all. I never felt never felt the burden, that's for sure. But I always wanted to help more. But the only thing I could really do is transport my dad here and there, because there wasn't much else I could do.
When he passed away, what do you remember how you felt?
Well, we were all at the hospital, and they had told us all to come, and it was a different town. He was in Grand Island at the Vets Hospital at that point, and they knew that his time was coming, and so they called us all in, and we sat around, in his room for quite a long time. And I was supposed to go play softball. I had a tournament. I was a softball player, and I didn't have my glove with me because I just thought, I'm going to be with my dad and I'm not going to be going to the tournament. Well, so then after a while, they told us that he was better and that we could all leave. So I went and played softball, and I played several games and got home at 1:00 in the morning and got a phone call that my dad had died. So we all left, and then he died, and my brother felt really bad about that. Like, he wishes that we would have been there, but it wasn't our fault. This is what they told us to do, and I wish I would have been there too. It would have been nice.
So coming out of that, did your life change at all?
Oh, I think it changed in my outlook. Not that, I've always been an optimistic person and sort of cheery and that kind of thing. But it changed in accepting birthdays, because I'm 69 now, and I'm just happy as hell to be 69, and so I embrace every one of them. And sure, don't I wish I was 39 and know everything I know now, but I think that's the biggest thing. Is I always thought I was going to die before I was 30 when my dad died, and I don't know why I picked 30. I just did. And then when I turned 30, I went, hey, I'm still here. I had a big party, lots of champagne, and then just ever since then, I've just been celebrating versus feeling bad when I turn 40 or 50 or 60. I just always feel happy for another birthday.
Going into photography school or journalism school, what was it like delving more into that? Because into RIT, like, what was it? It was RIT, right?
Well, after I left the University of Nebraska, when I'd taken all of Professor Tuck's photo classes, and there were no more to be taken, when I went to RIT, I kind of had to. They make you kind of start over there, and that was okay because I needed it anyway. I didn't really have a grasp on everything, so I was just a beginning photography student, and it was just I don't know. It was great because everybody there was doing the same thing, and it was hard. I always had to work a couple of jobs as well as go to school full time, so I was always really busy. But it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And I was happy to go to RIT because it's a really good school. And so it kind of was the only thing I had in my cap at that point, that I graduated from RIT. I actually didn't graduate by the time I'd left. I talked the school into giving me, I don't even remember how many hours, but quite a few hours in when I went to live and study under pioneering photographer Berenice Abbott.
Yeah, tell me about who they were.
Well, so I when I was in college, at RIT. I took one good picture, as I mentioned, at the University of Nebraska. I took 0 good pictures at RIT. When I gave my presentation last week at Santa Monica College, I couldn't find any good pictures that I'd taken.
Really?
I'm pretty sure it made the students feel really good that I'd only taken one good picture in 5 years. But it's a wonder I actually kept going.
Why did you keep going?
3 things that happened at RIT that kept me going, and one of them was that, well, this didn't have anything to do with photography necessarily. Well, it did in the future, but I took a trip with a new college friend to Maine for a week, and I'd never seen an ocean. I was 22 years old, and I'd never seen an island.
Wow!
So that was really cool. And I went to Monhegan Island. And I met her friend who lived there, who'd had a terrible accident in his 20s because he was a wild child.
Terrible accident. What happened?
A car accident, and it made him. It changed him. It changed everything. He wasn't mentally quite the same and physically the same. But that's who we met. That's who I met when we went there, and he was really nice. And when I left, he hands me a napkin, and he said, "Don't open it until you get on the boat." And I get on the boat, and I open it up, and it says, "Don't be sorry, be safe." And so at that moment I went, I need to come back to Monhegan Islands. If I ever become a good photographer, I've got to come back here and document life on this island and all the people who live here, because there's like 75 people who live here. And 13 years later, I did.
Wow.
So that was that. The second great thing that happened to me at RIT was I took a history of photography class, and I learned about Berenice Abbott. So the third great thing that happened to me at RIT is I learned, just from it's a long story, but I learned about Berenice Abbott needing an apprentice. And so had I not taken the history of photography, I wouldn't have known who Berenice Abbott is. So I'm always telling students that the second most important class in your photography education is the history of photography. And so that apprenticeship changed my life.
And so what did you do for
We printed every day. We printed to her work. It's the Museum of the City of New York at the time owned the rights to print her work and sell it. And so they would call us and tell us what they needed printed, what they sold. So we printed a lot. So when I think about going to see her and getting an interview and showing her my prints, I'm kind of mortified over what I must have shown her, because I don't think I knew how to print, but she liked me, I think. And she said, I was all ready to quit school right then and there to be Berenice Abbott's apprentice, because this was like a major coup at my college, though nobody knew about it because I didn't tell anybody. But she said,
why didn't you tell anyone? Because you were worried?
I was afraid I'd jinx it. So I said to her, I'll quit school right now and I'll come apprentice with you. And she said, well, when do you finish school? And I said, in 6 months. And she goes, go ahead and finish and then come. And I was like, great, that's great. It's a lot easier than going back to school later and so forth. And so, but I was real worried she'd forget who I am in 6 months. And that's when I didn't tell anybody about it, because I was afraid I'd jinx it away. So 3 months later, halfway into when I was going to move there, I called her and I said, how about if I come to Maine for spring break? And we work together for a few days so we get to know each other. And she goes, honey, that's a great idea.
What was it like going out there?
Well, it was really great. We had a lot of fun and we worked hard. I was real nervous, of course, but I made my first print with Berenice Abbott in her darkroom, and we probably worked for 2 or 3 days. And then I turned around and went back, and I drove both ways, 15 hours by myself, no problem.
Wow. Did it feel like you were kind of like getting your footing and getting your independence, like with that trip?
Oh, absolutely. Because I'd never driven that far before. Ever by myself. And it kind of started everything, because I was only like 23 years old, 22, 23. And ever since then, nothing has ever stopped me as far as travel or what it takes to do it. Or
3 months later, did you go back?
So yes. And so in June, I went to live with her, and she had 2 homes. I lived in the big home. And that's where we worked and printed and did all of her work. And her library was there. It was fabulous. And then she had a little A-frame house on the lake, a couple miles away. So oftentimes she stayed at the house where I was, and or she'd be at her A-frame. And she'd come every day, and I'd spend the morning getting the print as good as I possibly could on my own. we were printing 8x10 negatives. So imagine an 8x10 print. Well, the negative's that big. So the enlarger is gigantic. It's the only time I've ever worked on an 8x10 enlarger in my whole life is at her place. And we would put the 8x10 negative in the enlarger and we would print. And sometimes it would, more often than not, it would take all 4 of our hands to do the dodging and burning. And you had to really concentrate a lot. And it was a lot of work.
What's the dodging and burning?
When you turn the enlarger on, the light goes through the negative onto the photographic paper. Photographic materials don't render scenes the way our eyes do. Like right now, if we had the window open, we could see outside and see inside with our eyes, and the exposure would be right on all of it, even though it's several stops brighter outside. But with photographic materials, you have to pick which one you want to expose, and the other one's not going to be. The other part of the picture is not going to be exposed right. So you either add time to make things darker or you take things away to make them lighter. So it's part of the process of making a print. It's a lot of work. And so what I would do is I would get her prints ready, almost as ready as you possibly could. And then she'd come and then we'd finesse it and then she'd leave. And then I would do all the washing and the flattening and the stamping and all that kind of stuff.
So you were getting like a master class in printmaking. Was she also showing you like photographic perspective and like how to actually maybe take more than just one good photo?
Yes. I think she my whole photographic education came together under her for the 5 years that I'd been doing it at 2 different colleges. And I had good teachers at both of those places. It was just me being young and taking a while to learn it all and having bad equipment. And so when I was with her, I could ask questions just one-on-one and I just learned so much. And right before I left RIT, I told one person about this. I told my history of photography teacher. He nearly fell off his chair, you can imagine, right? And he said, "Oh, Julia, you must keep copious journals about everything she says, everything you learn, everything she does." And I did. And I've put a book together. I just haven't had time to find a publisher. It's called The Last Apprentice because I was her last one.
Wow. So you were her apprentice for a year?
I was her apprentice for a year. I could have stayed longer, but I was antsy and ready to go on to the next thing.
What did you want to do next?
Well, I never knew what I was going to do next. Everything kind of fell in front of me, and I'd say, "Okay, I'm going to do that because I don't know what else to do." So following Maine, I didn't have any money. I didn't have any money to go find a job. And so my friend John, who owned a whitewater rafting company in Maine, he was taking his whole business down to West Virginia, and he needed a few of us to drive his equipment down, like the school bus and this. So he paid me to drive the school bus from Maine to West Virginia, and then he let me set up my own little business of taking pictures of all the tourists on the whitewater rafting. Yeah. So I would meet them at the beginning of the trip, and I'd take everybody's $10 and their name and their address, and then I'd go wait for them to come by on the. I'd either go in the raft and get out, or I would go just by car and get to a certain spot and take pictures. And so I did that for 5 or 6 weeks and lived in a tent. And then I had a friend who lived in Lake Placid, and I thought, I'm going to go to Lake Placid. And every newspaper, magazine, TV station, radio station, everybody was going to be there, and maybe I can find a job. So that's what I did. And my friend Ashley that I'd met in college, she said, "You can stay with me for a week." She says, "But I got to tell you, everybody's getting kicked out of their rentals. You're going to really have a hard time finding a place to live." Right. And I said, I'll find something. Well, sure enough, I found a house on its own 60 acres of mountain, 12 miles outside of town with 2 cool dudes my age. So they were became brothers, and I moved in with them and I paid $75 a month.
What?
Right? And
on
it's because
60
it wasn't
acres?
Yeah, on 60 acres of our own mountain. And it was really great. So I was there for, I guess, 6 months or 8 months. And what happened then while I was there, just like I thought might happen, is I ended up meeting up with, I got a bartending job because I always had to get a job somewhere doing something. And while I was there, I met with some people from the Associated Press, and they hired me. They hired me as a gopher for the wire service, and I worked really hard for 2 weeks. And whatever they wanted me to do, I was always cheery and eager and ready, and they liked that, I guess. And then I also had a press pass to shoot when I wasn't working, so that was fun. Then from there, they offered me a job in New York.
Wow.
Well, but they didn't have, so they knew photography was my interest, but there were no positions in the photo department of the Associated Press, but there was a spot in the sports department as a baseball dictationist. So they said, you want that? We'll get you in there and then we'll slide you into photo when we can.
Yeah.
Right. And so I said, sure. So I take this job and basically what you're doing, especially back then, this is 1980, is you're taking dictation from a journalist in the field, and they're talking their story to you, and you're typing it up.
Out, yeah.
And so you have to learn, that job required you to learn how to spell everybody's names, like Carl Yastrzemski, and without looking it up. And you had to do box scores, and I don't remember how to do them, but I learned.
Score?
It's like totaling up everything. So you know what people that were, all their stats.
Right.
So I had to do all that, like while the clock is ticking, and so. But I was only there for 3 weeks, and amazingly, a spot came open in the photo department, and they slid me in.
Wow, that's quick.
Yeah, really quick. So I didn't even, like, the training was over, and I was ready to start being a baseball dictationist, and then my job there was over, and I was in the photo lab. So that was great.
And so, what were you doing in the photo lab?
Well, you're just, you do one number of things. I was often the supervisor's assistant, so I was writing a lot of captions all day. They would throw pictures at you, and you'd have to take 30 seconds to write a caption because they put it on the wire and they send it over. The Associated Press is a wire service that distributes photographs all across the world, and newspapers that are subscribers can use them and then give credit to AP and the photographer. But I was only there about a year and 3 months, and I really got tired of sitting at a desk. It was kind of stressful too, because you're constantly on deadlines. I took the phone call when John Lennon got shot. I took the phone call when Ronald Reagan got shot. Yeah, so I was really well informed because I was reading like 3 newspapers a day, all the New York newspapers, because you had to see who was competing with you. UPI back then competed with AP, and you wanted to see who was winning and who got the picture in first. And so I really was on top of it. So it was really fun. It was a great education. I only made $9,000 that year. $9,000. Now this is 1980, but nevertheless, that was poverty level.
As you were working for the Associated Press, was there this feeling building up that you wanted to really flex the lessons that you had learned over the last couple of years in photography, and like actually, instead of just writing the captions, like take the pictures?
Yes, but I didn't really know what kind of photography I wanted to do yet. Even though I found myself in journalism, I did like journalism. I studied photography at RIT. I didn't study journalism, right? I studied journalism at UNL, but not long enough. So I really didn't know what kind of photographer I wanted to be. And when I left New York, I spent 2 months on the road with my Texaco credit card. I ate off of it, and I filled my car with it. And I had friends along the way, or else I'd camp with my tent, or else I'd stay in my car. I did stuff like that. But while I was traveling around for those couple of months, I was trying to figure out what to do. And I was photographing general stores, sort of the last of the dying general stores across America. So it became a project. I did a whole documentary project on them back then. And then while I was on that trip, while I was trying to work on my first documentary project, because Berenice always told me I needed a project, I found out about a job in Colorado as a ski photographer. So I got that job, and off I went to Colorado for a season, and I did that. So you see, I had no idea what kind of photographer I wanted to be, and just one thing was leading to another, and nothing paid well, but it was all fun. And so at the end of the season from Colorado, I didn't know what I was going to do. And Professor George Tuck calls me and says, "Julia, I'm going to be gone this summer. I wonder if you want to teach my class at the University of Nebraska." And I said, "I barely know what I'm doing, actually, to tell you the truth. I barely knew what I was doing photographically, and I certainly didn't know how to teach." And I said, "Sure, why not?" He goes, "You can stay at my house for free." So I went back that summer and stayed in his house for free for the summer, and loved it. I had no idea I would love teaching. I never even thought about teaching. So I guess the people in the journalism department took note, and they invited me to stay to get a free ride to graduate school in journalism if I would teach the basic photojournalism classes.
You would get a free full ride?
Yeah, so I got a free full ride, and they paid me $400 a month to teach the classes and full ride for free. But you can't live on $400 a month. So I also had 2 other jobs while I was doing that too, you know. So I always had a lot going on. That was 82 to 85 is when I went to graduate school. I didn't finish my thesis yet. That came later when I came back.
How was that program different than the programs that you had done before?
Well, this was a journalism program. So, and it was graduate level. Some of the classes I really didn't like at all, like the theory classes and things like that. I like practical classes. Like I love the writing classes for a newspaper and copy edit and, you know, practical things. So I was happy to finally get my master's done, but it was several years later when I got it all done.
Why was there a break?
Well, I think that in 85, I ended up getting another teaching job in Omaha at Metro Community College. And then that took me away, so I didn't get it done. And then next thing I know, I'm moving back to Maine a decade later to teach at the Maine Photo Workshops for 2 years, and that took me away. And then finally in 1990, I came back, and that's when I finished my thesis and taught again at the University of Nebraska.
But there was a point where you were traveling for a bit, right? And like you were in Guatemala.
Well, yes, when I was in graduate school, so I was 27 when I started teaching and at the university, which is quite young. And I was 29 when I finally went out of the country for the first time. So that's when my travels started at 29. And I had to make up for lost time ever since because I hadn't been anywhere. And so that's when they started. And I went to Europe first. And then from there, I did Mexico and then Central America, a bunch of places in Central America, and then eventually Asia, India, Thailand, Cambodia.
How are you able to travel everywhere?
Well, it's kind of remarkable, actually. I guess I didn't eat much, and I certainly didn't live in very nice places. The most expensive place I lived in India for 5 months was $5. So you can imagine what my places were like. But what happened, the reason I finally found out what kind of photographer I wanted to be when I went on that first trip to Europe. And I had it set up with Bicycling Magazine that I was going to photograph the Tour de France because I thought I was into sports back then. And I was, I guess, but I kind of got bored with sports. It was fun. A lot of cute guys, but I sort of got bored. And so after the Tour de France, which was fabulous, then I went to Greece and former Yugoslavia, hitchhiked through Yugoslavia and across the border. And it was those pictures that I took that made me realize what documentary photography is and that's what I wanted to do. And so what I would do the next decade then, while I was teaching at all these different places, is that I would gather together assignments from relief agencies, religious newspapers, nonprofits, anybody who's out there working around the world trying to make the world a better place. I was covering stories about them. I really never made any money. I just made enough money to go and do the work, right? And one time I was in Guatemala, and I think I must have been there for a couple months, maybe 3 months, and I ran out of money after 2 months, completely out of money, and I couldn't leave because my ticket was set and you couldn't change it, and I didn't have anybody to call at home and say, "Can you bail me out?" So I sat in a park, this really cool park in Antigua, Guatemala, which is World Heritage, beautiful spot where there are a lot of indigenous people selling their wares and a lot of tourists coming through buying them. So I sat on a bench for 5 days in a row, all day long, and read a book with a little sign, a big sign next to me that says "Film for Sale." And I sold enough film that it gave me enough money to stay there for another month because I always had more than I needed for film. So that was really great. That really worked out well. And I've just had to, when I was in Europe, that first time I ran out of money and I needed to get to the airport, and I didn't tell the taxi cab driver I didn't have any money when I got in, but about 3/4 of the way through, by the time he really liked me, we were having a great conversation. Then I told him I didn't have any money, but would he please take me to the airport and I'll send it to him when I get home. And so he did. And I did send it to him when I got home, and I sent him a couple of photography books also. So he, so I think he was probably happy that he did that for me. So I've just had to talk myself out of a lot of things, when I didn't have any money.
Was it that you didn't value making money, or was it that you just couldn't figure out how?
I would like to have made money, but I couldn't figure out how because what I wanted to do it was just nearly impossible to make money at it.
And you didn't want to compromise what you wanted to do.
Right. This is the problem. And that I just didn't want to, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, So it meant living I mean, I could have gotten a college teaching job and I would have had like a nice income all these years, right? Um, uh, but I wanted to do all these other things, and so it's a tough way to make a living. I think the only reason I gave it up though is because I moved to LA, and I had to once I started my school.
Yeah. So tell me about moving to LA, and like, did you get some of the pictures that you felt proud of?
Yes, I have quite a portfolio of all these places. The one that comes to mind right off the bat is one that I call Madonna Unchild, and it's a mother and her child who is she's breastfeeding her child, and it's raining, so you can see the rain falling on her, and it's kind of a somber moment. That the child is kind of older, like 3 or 4, and is breastfeeding still just for the nutrition because they're very poor. That one stands out in my mind, but there's a lot of them. I can tell you the pictures I missed too. Those stand out in my mind as well.
Like what?
I drive a motor scooter, and I was driving home from Hollywood to downtown on it, and I came to a stoplight because I don't take pictures unless I'm stopped, and I look over, and there's a school bus next to me, and there's a little kid with his nose smashed up against the window, and the sun is just hitting him perfectly. It's like the most beautiful shot, right? I pick my camera up, and it's always on. And for some reason, it had gotten turned off. And just in the moment that I had to turn it on, some other kids saw what I was doing and tapped the other kid on the shoulder, and I missed the shot. Oh. So it's those kinds of shots. I could put a whole book together of shots that I've missed. You remember them.
And it's interesting, like also how you look at that shot where it's like you're like, I guess, like, do you feel like you notice beauty more because of how you've like trained your eye to pick up these moments of beauty?
It's true. You do. I think one of the most gratifying things of being an educator for 4 decades is that people have told me that I've taught them how to see. And I like that, because I suppose same thing goes for somebody who studies music and their ear. You know, they finesse things, and that's what happens with photography too. After so many years, you get better at it, and you finesse things. And you see light too. What I think the great thing about being a photographer is that you learn to see light. And I've had people say to me, "What do you mean, Julia, when you say that? Do you see light?" And so I'll take somebody, and they're in the shadow right here, and there's like a beam of light over here, and I'll just take the person and go put them in that beam of light, and I'll go, "See," and they go, it's like it's kind of a great moment for them, because they realize what seeing light means. It's like, oh.
Yeah. And so going into, you got offered a book contract, like at the tail end of the 80s. How did that happen?
When I went back to Maine a decade after leaving Berenice Abbott's, I was teaching for the Maine photo workshops. And that first summer that I was there, in the summers, there was a lot of 1-week workshops. When I was there during the year, they had a year-long program that I was teaching. But in the summer, it was like week-long workshops with different students every week. And in one of those weeks, an editor from Houghton Mifflin was in my class. And she really liked my work and me and everything. And she offered me, at the end of the week, a book contract to do a children's book. And she said, I think it'd be really cool if you did it in a place in Maine where the seasons really affect, seasons are really different. Winter is really different than summer, because there's lots of people here in the summer and it's really dead in the winter. And I said, well, I have just the place. Monhegan Island. I was there 13 years ago, right? And so that's how that all came about. I actually went back to Monhegan Island then and spent 4 months, over a year's time, on the island.
What was it like revisiting it?
I went out there to Monhegan Island before I started my project to talk to a few of the locals to see if they'd mind if I sort of butted into their lives and documented their lives for the next year. And everybody said that people I talked to seemed okay with it. And I re-met Newt, the guy that I'd stayed with 13 years later. He says, I'm only here in the summers. If you want to live in my summer cottage in the winter, you can do it for free, but you're going to have to pay a lot in heating to try to stay warm. And I said, okay, great. So I got his place for free, but it was really cold. And my dog and I both had like 2 sleeping bags on us at night to sleep. And I had no running water. You'd had to use a bucket to flush the toilet. And so I was there for several months at his place.
So going from shooting all of that, how did the book come together?
Well, I am a writer as well as a photographer, so I wrote the book as well. So I spent the whole year that I was photographing, I was also interviewing people at different times because I don't photograph and interview at the same time. It's two different jobs. But so I was interviewing a lot of people, from tourists to people who live there, people who work there, everything. And so then I went afterwards. I went back to Nebraska. My friends are always helping me out. And a couple of friends, Beth Barrett and Steve Potter, they gave me they had a place in Lincoln, Nebraska that they lived somewhere else. They used it once in a while to come to Lincoln, but they let me live there for 10 months while I finished writing my Mohegan Island book and got ready to go to India to do my second book. And so that's where I got it all. That's when I got it all written. The Mohegan book got published in like a few years later. But the India book never got published because I guess Houghton Mifflin decided they didn't want to do the nonfiction children's books anymore.
How did the first book do? Was it just because did it do well? Or?
Yes, it sold out. There were 15,000 copies and it sold out. It was an inexpensive book. It was at like $15. In 1995, it won a big award in Maine. And so I got flown in back to Maine to accept this award. And that's when I got to go back to Mohegan Island again. And that's the last time I've been there. That was 1995. I'd like to go back again soon.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a beautiful place. So going into LA, like what moved you to LA?
Right before I went to India, I started a new business called Julia Dean and Associates. And basically what that was is anything that I did fell under Julia Dean and Associates, right? So the classes I taught, eventually I would have guest speakers and I did a project called the Child Labor in the Global Village, and that was all under the name Julia Dean and Associates. So I started that before I went to India. A couple of students went to India with me. We didn't see each other a lot because we were working on our own stories, but we saw each other a little bit in between. And then when I came back after 5 months in India and a month in Malaysia and Thailand, after I came back, then I tried to sell all of our stories. And I started my Julia Dean and Associates was like a picture agency to try to sell socially concerned work by photographers. So I was going to represent photographers who were doing that kind of work. Ultimately, I had to stop doing the picture agency because I wasn't making any money, neither were the photographers, and I felt like I wasn't making a difference either. But I continued to do things under Julia Dean and Associates, and I knew I could live anywhere I wanted to live because I was a freelancer. I had the Julia Dean and Associates, and I had teaching experience, so I could go anywhere. And this friend of mine, Ashley, that I mentioned before, she was making a good living at the time, and she flew me in to L.A. to see her. And or actually, I think I drove, but she paid my way. And she really wanted me to move to Los Angeles, and she lived in Beverly Hills, and it was January at the time. And I said, well, Ashley, this is the prettiest place I've ever seen in January, but it's too white and it's too rich for me. I said, she says, just wait, I'm going to take you somewhere you're going to love and you're going to want to move here. She takes me to Venice Beach, and of course, in the boardwalk. And of course, I have to live here. I'm like, I have to live here.
What do you like about Venice Beach at that time?
It was just diverse, everything, like from how much money somebody made to what they did for a living to, you just had to race and ethnicity. And so you just had it was a melting pot of everybody. And
the cast of characters in Venice has always been like very wide.
Exactly. And so I loved it, and I'm a photographer. And so I really wanted to live in Venice Beach. And so before I left, I found a spot right on Abbott Kinney with 3 young guys, and I gave them I kid you not, I gave them my last $100. And I was on my way back to Nebraska, but Nebraska's often been temporary for me, just as a spot to go for a while in between. So I had to go back. So I gave them my last $100. I had to borrow $100 from Ashley just to get home back to Nebraska. And then she also gave me this book by Deepak Chopra called Creating Affluence. And it was all about bringing money in. And so I read it every day. She said, read this like every day. And I did. And I'll be darned if Joel Sartori, my dear friend, who was my in my first photography class I ever taught. He's a National Geographic photographer. He calls me up and said, "Hey, this advertising agency in Nebraska wants me to do this big project with HUD housing projects, and I can't. I'm too busy with National Geographic. You want the job?" Wow. And so for 18 straight days, 15 hours a day, I went to like 4 different towns all over Nebraska photographing HUD housing projects. And I came back to Lincoln in 3 days' time. I processed 147 rolls of film, made 147 contacts, 30 pages, single space captions, all in 3 days' time, because I hardly slept. My dog and I went to the University of Nebraska and did all this work. Then I'd go home to shower in between and come back, and then I got in the car and moved to L.A. after it was all over, and I had $7,000. I netted $7,000 on this job, and I'd never had any.
Like a couple days of work.
No, it was 18 days of work.
18 days of
15
work.
hours a day. Yeah,
that's insane. Well, and that's like in a few days of work, you had made more or almost as much as you'd made in a year.
Exactly.
That's insane. What did that feel like?
California, here I come. Right. I was so happy. And, I just, my sort of my MO all my life is I want to do this, and I don't have any money, but I'm going to make it happen. And somehow it always has. It just always, it still is with Projecting L.A., which we'll get to. If I didn't go after what I wanted to do, even without the funds, I would have never done anything that I've done in my life. And so sometimes you just have to do it without comfort.
When did you start doing the workshops?
Well, so right when I got here in 1994, I was doing the Julia Dean and Associate, which was this picture agency. But I was also, right away, I got a job at L.A. Valley College. And eventually I got a job at Santa Monica College for a year while somebody was on sabbatical. And then I got a job at LA Southwest College. So I was getting temporary jobs at various colleges. By then I'd had my master's, which you have to have in California to get a teaching job. And so, but I also started teaching out of that loft I lived in with the 3 guys. Yeah. And one thing led to another, and I started getting, I'd run around town and I'd put up 8.5 by 11-inch flyers. And in the very beginning, it said, "Interested in a photography class? Call Julia Dean at Julia Dean and Associates." And I didn't even say what kind of photography class. So like 3 people just called me up and go, "I need to know the basics." I go, "Great, here's a basic class and here's the dates," right? And so for 4 years I did it that way. And then by the end, you'd see my flyers would have like 12 classes, different classes on it that you could pick from. And so when I got together with my partner, Jay Adler, who's a professor of English, I realized I need to make a better living to help pay my share and so forth. And so I called up my friend Ingrid, who is an affluent and generous woman. And I said, "Ingrid, would you consider lending me some money to start a school? Like a real school versus just teaching out of my lofts." Yeah. And she said, "Write me a proposal and I'll see what I can do." And so
this is something that had been a long time coming, because like you had been interested in photography for a while, and you had started teaching when you were like 27, right? So it's like you had been honing both of those skills. And so it only makes sense that it comes together in this moment where you like start your own thing. So you wrote the proposal, and did she?
And she said yes, and she lent me $15,000, and I started my business on $15,000. And then for the next 10 years, I borrowed money from her and paid it back, and borrowed money. No bank would even consider looking at me back then. And so ultimately, I raised that credit, and I could talk to a bank, but I couldn't the first 10 years. And if it wouldn't been for Ingrid, I wouldn't have stayed in business. And
wow.
So she was. How
did the business grow?
Well, it was just in the beginning, it was just me. And I hadn't really thought about what it could become. I just wanted to teach my own workshops and have my own little school. And we called it, Jay, my partner, he's the one that named it the Julia Dean Photo Workshops, because I was the only teacher. Yeah. So we thought it kind of would be dumb to call it LA something if it was just me being the teacher. And so for 14 years, I was, that's what it was called, the Julia Dean Photo Workshops. But along the way, within probably the second year, I started inviting more teachers. I couldn't pay all the expenses with just me. I was teaching 2 classes on a Saturday, and I was teaching every night, and I was teaching around the clock and running the business. I basically worked 80 hours a week for 22 and a half years that I was there. Maybe 60 to 80 is probably more like it. But the first 10 years was just hard on me.
But would you do these workshops other places than LA?
Well, so I had my school right there on the beach, and ultimately I needed more room because I needed more income, and I needed another classroom for another teacher. So after 8 years in this little space on the beach at the end of Washington Boulevard, then I moved down the road a bit on the beach, right on the boardwalk, and I had more space, and I had another 2 to 3 classrooms, and so then things started growing. But the business is it's a hard business to keep going, and I had taken on a partner in 2009, and that went pretty well for 4 years because I had help, and it could grow, and we had moved into a really cool big space thanks to my partner, but it still was hard, and we just weren't making it. It just wasn't working out, and we just had to make a decision. What should we do?
What wasn't working out about it?
Well, it just wasn't enough money for everybody. There just wasn't. It's just like, I mean, I paid myself so little for so many years, and so it just was hard to. It was just hard to keep it going, and to not get in debt, and so at one point it kind of. I decided, I checked into being a nonprofit, and that seemed like the right way to go because what that meant was more help from more people. And so that's what we did. So basically what I did was I donated my business to a nonprofit that we then renamed the Los Angeles Center of Photography. And I was the founder of it also and the executive director for 8.5 more years. So total, I was with Julia Dean Photo Workshops and LACP, Los Angeles Center of Photography, for 22.5 years.
And so when you donated and created that new like entity, how did that help the business like grow and sustain?
We built our board, and so people, there's money coming in from board members. There's help coming in. Maybe somebody on the board knows something about PR or some. We just had more help doing different things, but it still wasn't that easy. It still was a hard business to keep going. But what happened from the beginning of time until right before the pandemic was it looked like we were a thriving, like making lots of money business, because in the beginning it was just me teaching all the classes, and then before the pandemic we had 150 classes a year and 100
Wow.
Different teachers.
It had an impact.
Yes, it definitely has helped pull a community together that wasn't ever quite there like that.
Yeah. What were some of the things that you're most proud of that happened after that point as you were kind of like centralizing yourself within the community?
I think all my life as an educator, I just really want to make a difference in people's lives. I don't have kids, and I did that on purpose because I want a lot of me for a lot of people, and I want to be able to help people's careers, and I want to be able to help people in a lot of different ways, and my school allowed that. It allowed me to be able to offer a lot to people in different ways, and so that was really gratifying. I loved it when I could invite somebody to be a guest speaker or a book signing. I mean, I love showing people off. I loved giving people their time in the limelight, and I did a lot of that, hundreds of exhibits. So I think the thing I'm most proud of JDPW LACP is the community that was built, the lives that have been affected from being under our roof, people I've given opportunities to teach. I like doing good things for other people, and when you have a school, you can do that.
Projecting L.A., can you tell me a little bit about how that started?
Sure. So in 2021, I took a new direction and was no longer with LACP any longer. I started what's called the LA Project. And kind of like Julia Dean and Associates back then, the LA project is kind of an umbrella for organization for all that I do. And one is teaching classes, and two is having this big event called Projecting L.A. And basically the way it came about was that I've been photographing this homeless guy named Jose Hernandez, who's become a dear friend of mine for 10 years now. And I did a really serious story on him during the couple of years around the pandemic. He had invited me in and said, let's really tell people my story. And this was going to be a part of, I wanted to put on an exhibit of a bunch of people's work, like I always do, photojournalists, street photographers, documentary photographers. And part of it was going to be his story. So rather than finding a gallery that we could go do this in, I thought I want to do something I've never done before. I want to have it outside, and I want to have it huge, and I want to have it on the side of a building. And the second reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted Jose to be able to come and see his pictures 80 feet wide and 3 stories tall. And he was not going to do that unless I probably did it outdoors where he feels comfortable, right? So this is how it all came about. And so we did our first Projecting LA in 2022. I've talked several friends into helping me, and everybody worked for free for months and months to get this all organized. We had students, emerging photographers, and professionals the first year, and we put music to it. One of the producers did all the music, and it was just outstanding. And then this year, we're doing it again. The budget's 3 times as high, and we've got more people helping us. But this year, it's just all professionals that are involved. So there's 32 photographers involved that each has a body of work, and the stories range from fentanyl users on the street to a homeless woman at 22 that's pregnant and living on the street, and the whole story about her baby when she has it and what happens. And there's a story about a nanny and her kids. We have 6 different projects that were done over the decades of the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, 10s. So it's just this rich show all about LA. And so the name is Projecting LA because that's exactly what we're doing, is we're projecting stories of Los Angeles, and we're doing it in the same place we did in 2022 in a parking lot in Chinatown. The parking lot's as big as a football field, and at the end of it is a 3-story building with a white wall. So it's perfect for our projection. Also, the Los Angeles Public Library has come on board as a supportive collaborator, and we're going to show the presentation at a different library branch every month for a year afterwards. Those will be inside, but that's really cool. We're really excited about that, and we're going to bring photographers to each community to talk to the people that come
That's awesome.
to the show.
Yeah, I feel like that, again, that speaks to the impact that you guys are having and the continual I guess like adding to the tapestry of like the stories of LA and the cultural richness. That's like a really exciting thing to do. So what are you most excited about for the future of everything you're doing?
It's a great idea. Projecting LA it's a great idea. It's not that it hasn't been done before, projecting on the side of a wall, but nobody's ever done it like this in LA, about LA. So it's something new. It's something exciting. We're showing off, like we have 3 Pulitzer Prize winners on our team. We've got a couple of LA Times photographers, Reuters, Associated Press, Agence France Presse. All these people have professional backgrounds. It's just outstanding work. So what we hope is that, I knew that I had to do it the first time to even tell people what the heck I was talking about. And I know I have to do it this second time to get the sponsorship that I need. Because the event, the second year, we did it the first year on $24,000, and I raised it all in 5 months' time. And luckily I've got some generous friends. Ingrid is one of them, the one that gave me the money lent me the money for my school. This year it's $64,000, and we've almost raised all of it on individual sponsorship so far. So that means a lot of really good people and a lot of good friends who believe in what we're doing. But to sustain it in the future, we can't just count on individual sponsorship. We need corporate sponsorship, and we need foundations, and we need money in bigger ways. And so that's what we're hoping the second one will do, is get the attention of people who actually would love to fund it in the future. That's what we're hoping. And I hope that I would love for this to just be an ongoing thing, because it's really special.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at Finding Founders Podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Finding Founders is produced and hosted by me, Samuel Donner.
Our audio editing team lead is Ashley Jimenez, with support from
Jessica Morales, Miley Lipton,
Siyu Pan,
Kenny Wright,
Josie Yo,
Matt Fernandez,
and Merritt Hill. Our outreach and research team lead is Desiree Nunez, with support from
Marissa Granados,
Monica Lee,
Sarah Tiersma,
and Yao Will.
To see more of what we're up to, subscribe to our newsletter at findingfounders.co. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.